In 1950, the US invaded North Korea and China, with multinational troops of 16 nations, under the UN banner, until a ceasefire was reached in 1953, after 3 million Korean and Chinese civilians were brutally killed. US military planes were first spotted, on the night of the 27th of January, 1952, circling over the Korean battlefield, at low altitude, but no bombs were dropped. The next morning, however, Chinese soldiers discovered many insects, such as flies, fleas, and spiders, all over the place in freezing cold. Realizing the US had used biological weapons on them, they burned the insects, and reported the matter to their commander. Laboratory tests found over 10 types of deadly germs in the insects dropped from US planes, including Yersinia pestis, cholera, and anthracis. 384 were infected, 126 died, 258 recovered. Starting from May 1952, China's Xinhua news agency published the confessions of 25 captured American pilots that the US had used biological weapons developed from Japanese research during the Korean War, violating the 1925 Geneva Protocol. Following is a section of a confession of US bombardier, First Lieutenant Bobby Elliott Hammett, describing how he dropped germ bombs over China, early 1952.
Then he described the bomb load as being 4 500-pound germ bombs. He told the pilot we were to climb to 8,500 feet altitude out toward the water on the west, then we were to turn north and proceed to drop our germ bombs on Antung. This took us all by surprise. As bombardier, that was my responsibility, and I was given a 1 to 50,000 detail approach chart to see what the target area looked like. I was instructed to drop the bombs in the northeast corner of Antung. We were warned to get back across the international boundary as quickly as possible. The major told us that if we encountered enemy aircraft, first of all try to get across the boundary, and then try to avoid being shot down. And the same if we were hit well over China. To get across the Yalu at all cost. If we were captured, I was to take the blame for being over China. Because I was the navigator of the aircraft, I was to claim that I had become lost. And above all, never to mention the germ bombs. Never to mention the germ bombs. The major said that if we failed to get our principal target, we should not bring any of the bombs back to South Korea. And he gave us a secondary target. He gave us flying instructions and again warned that we must not admit to germ bombing on the Chinese mainland. That we must not admit to germ bombing on the Chinese mainland. We had to return to K-14 to get debriefed. About 10 miles south of the Yalu River, we set up the bomb run. At about 2216. I directed the pilot. Things I was looking for were the rivers, and how the roads were aligned. I corrected the course with the bomb site, about 3 miles from the target, and then had the pilot open the bomb bay door, and set the intervalometer on train, with a spacing of 150 feet. At the bomb release point, all I had to do was press the bomb release switch once, and all the bombs were released in train. 150 feet apart. I watched to see some sort of explosion, but saw no bomb flashes. Immediately after bombs away, we turned and left the target area and returned to K-14 to be debriefed. The same major debriefed us, and I told him I had done as ordered, and dropped the 4 germ bombs 1 mile from the northeast corner of Antung, and had observed no explosions. He told us our mission had been a successful one, and warned us against mentioning the details of this mission to anyone. He said, "Since you are all officers, you know the penalty for revealing secret information. You know the penalty for revealing secret information." He dismissed us, and we returned to our own base that morning.
All 25 American prisoners of war who testified against the US, retracted their confessions after they were released and returned to the US. But overwhelming evidence is still crying out against the US regime. Apart from the testimonies of the prisoners of war, is the evidence provided by war journalist John Powell and biochemist Joseph Needham. Powell was tried for sedition after reporting that the US tested their biological weapons on Korean and Chinese prisoners of war. As part of the ISC team, Needham was blacklisted by USA for maintaining that the US did use biological weapons during the Korean War.
The full text of a report claiming the US military used biological weapons during the Korean War will soon be up for auction. Kobe, Korea's largest art and antiques auction company, said Tuesday that filmmaker Im Jong-tae is selling the document after having acquired it in 2013 from a bookstore in England. The so-called Needham report contains photos, maps and testimony from American POWs that biological weapons developed from Japanese research were used during the war. It was filed in 1953 and was thought to have been discarded. US psychologist Jeffrey Kay posted a 64-page version of the 670-page document online in January. The US maintains it did not use biological weapons during the Korean War.
Despite overwhelming evidence, the US denied the charges of using biological warfare during the Korean War. Both the International Red Cross and the World Health Organization covered up for the US and ruled out biological warfare. So, the US got away with its war crime. History repeats itself. 67 years later, in 2019, the US secretly brought to Wuhan the coronavirus they genetically edited to target the Chinese population, since the virus parent had escaped from the CIA lab in Fort Detrick, causing an outbreak of 3 deaths and 63 sickened at Green Spring Nursing Home in Springfield. Multiple scientific studies have proved COVID-19 was genetically engineered during a meeting of senior Freemasons in the City of London. As early as 2005, the Anglo-Saxons were already laughing at their plot that their bioweapon will make sure China will catch a cold. The COVID-19 attack on China and the world was announced in Masonic cargo to all the Illuminati gangsters around the world in the 2012 London Olympic opening ceremony. Though overwhelming evidence points to a US bioweapon attack plot on China, the US denies it and blames it on China. WHO also covers it up for the US, exactly as what they played 67 years ago. China's spokesman was sanctioned by the US for speaking out the truth. All Western media help cover up the war crime for the US, silencing truth speakers. As of today, the Anglo-Saxon bioweapon has murdered almost 1 million people around the world, yet the real culprit of the pandemic is still hiding behind the WHO. As it is written, truth is nowhere to be found. There is no justice in this world. That's why God himself will trample all the nations and rule over all the earth himself.